Welcome everybody to our third installment of the Rural Funding Opportunity webinar. We did two yesterday. This is our third one. We will be posting a video version of this online. And so if you want to go back and see any details, you'll have that opportunity when we finish. And also for anybody who is working with other small businesses in rural communities, please make sure you get a link to this webinar and you push it out, and so we can get this information to as many companies as possible. Now, as we jump in, my name is Miles Hansen. I'm the president and CEO of World Trade Center Utah. In normal times, we focus on helping Utah companies increase their international sales, work to attract investment here to the state, and we help engage internationally to enhance Utah's global status around the world. We're still doing a lot of that. The focus has been helping companies retain their international presence, keep them in other markets. We provide free consultations, market research, grant programs. We can provide $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 to help offset the costs of companies growing internationally or retaining their international position during this COVID crisis. During this COVID crisis, we are also serving on the governor's economic response task force. We've been asked to lead and organize a federal committee that is focused on maximizing the number of Utah businesses that participate and benefit from the many federal programs and resources that exist for Utah small businesses. We've been doing that in partnership with all the organizations on the webinar today. We're very grateful to Marla Trollin and John Gigi with the SBA. They have been working around the clock to process as many applications as possible to troubleshoot problems for Utah companies, and they've been a tremendous partner. We look forward to hearing from them in a few minutes as they dig into the details of these programs, what they are, who is eligible, how to apply, and we'll make sure we have time at the end to answer questions. We're also joined today by Justin Anthony with Senator Mike Lee's office and Scott Albrecht with Senator Mitt Romney's team. Everybody in the congressional delegation have been very good partners over the past few weeks, helping to engage in Washington on behalf of Utah companies and industries, as well as responding to inquiries coming from Utah companies. You'll have a chance to hear from both of them. They will put their email addresses in the chat function, and we encourage you to reach out to them if there are things that a congressional delegation can do to help you in your business. We're also joined today by Randy Parker with the USDA. He is somebody who I hope many of you are, if not all of you, are familiar with. He can talk about what the specific USDA programs and funding opportunities that are available to you in our rural businesses. And we also have Ryan Starks with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. They have been doing some phenomenal work pulling together small loans for Utah's smallest businesses, less than 50 employees. And they've also been very much engaged with the legislature on some of the new policies and programs that the state is working on. And so we look forward to hearing from Ryan in a minute. What I thought I would do very quickly is just talk a little bit more about the work that the federal committee is doing as part of the governor's task force and identify a couple of resources for you. Early on, we realized that the two key tasks of the task force would be to make sure we have very deep expertise on these federal programs and resources, and that we're able to distill that down into key bits of information to share with companies. We know that companies are very, very busy working to cover payroll and rent and utilities, figure out how to respond to the crisis, and y'all don't have time to go out and research these programs that are pretty complex. You need somebody just to get you the information you need. We have a team on the committee. Justin Anthony has been very much involved in that effort, as well as Shelby Dyack with the Commerce Department and Nicole Sherwood with World Trade Center Utah and others. You can find that information that they've pulled together on coronavirus.utah.gov/business. They have an overview of all the different federal programs and resources there, several different products, one pages that show that kind of compares the different programs. And so I encourage you to take a look at that, dig in that information. It will be very valuable for you. The other effort we realized is that there would just be an overwhelming number of requests for assistance coming from Utah small businesses, and they would be going to the SBA, but others as well. And so we stood up a rapid response team. We put a call out for volunteers, and now we have more than 50 volunteers trained up from about 15 different organizations. And they, to date, just over the past couple of weeks, they have helped more than 1,700 Utah small businesses get assistance and answers to their questions. The team is charged with providing solutions and solving problems, not just passing along information. And so when a company reaches out, a member of the team will engage, and it'll be through emails, text, phone calls, whatever necessary. And the member of the team will stay with the small business until they're able to get answers to their questions and troubleshoot problems that they are having. You can access the rapid response team also on the website, coronavirus.utah.gov/business. When you go there, right at the top, you will see a big link for the rapid response team. You can click that to submit a request for help. You fill out a form. That then goes to the team. A member of the team will pick that up. They'll reach out to you, and they will help provide that one-on-one counseling and advice that so many businesses need right now. With that overview, let's go ahead and jump into our program. Why don't we hear, I'll pass it first to Justin Anthony with Senator Lee's team, and after that, we'll hear from Scott Albrecht with Senator Romney's team. So Justin, over to you.
Thank you, Miles, and good morning, everyone. It's great to be with all of you today, and certainly appreciate all of you taking time to sign on to the webinar. Realize it's an extremely busy time for everyone, and it's very much phone call to email, back to phone call. But this is certainly, we see these to be extremely helpful and valuable to really, make sure that the information is getting out to the business community about what resources and programs are available. And so we just want to thank World Trade Center Utah as well as the SBA for putting on these webinars, and certainly are very glad to be participating. Also want to go ahead and further introduce myself. My name is Justin Anthony. I'm Senator Mike Lee's Business Outreach Director. I serve as the liaison between the business community and the senator. Work very closely with the senator, with the chief of staff, our state director, as well as the legislative team on any issue that's affecting the business community. So it's certainly been a busy time, but it's also been an extremely busy time for our staff, because while we spend a lot of time traveling in the community in normal times, we've shifted all of that to communicating via Zoom, via webinars, phone calls, texts, because we really want to stay engaged with Utahns. I can honestly say from my perspective, I certainly miss the travel, but I'm slowly getting used to the Zoom and the webinars and everything. But the important part for us and for the senators, ensuring that we're still engaging as much as possible with Utahns, understanding how these federal programs are affecting businesses, understanding what the needs are of the community, ensuring that we're doing all we can to assist Utah, the people of Utah, and the businesses of Utah weather this storm. And also want to point out on the resource point, I know Miles had touched on the Federal Resource Committee, but also want to again reiterate that and reiterate that as a resource at coronavirus.utah.gov/business. It's incredibly important information up there. Again, we've spent time going through all the different programs that are out there, whether that's USDA or SBA, just ensuring that that information is in a catch-all spot. And not only is the information there and up to date and updated regularly, but as Miles had said, it's really simplified down to as simple as we can make it, because these are complex programs and we realize that you all don't have the time to sit there and read through bill text. And so we put together one pages. We've also released different FAQs as well, just to make sure that all of that information is as clear as possible. Another thing I wanted to point out, as of last week, Senator Lee was appointed to the Opening Up America Again congressional group. The goal of this group is to advise the president, advise and assist the president as they go to support local and state governments as they navigate that process of reopening economies. Certainly, this is something that Senator Lee is taking extremely seriously and ensuring that Utah's voice is being heard. And one of those aspects is we want Utahns to be able to submit their feedback. So we've launched an online portal at lee.senate.gov that will allow Utahns to go in, submit feedback, any questions, any comments, any concerns that they have. We realize this is an extremely interesting time as well as an unprecedented time. And there are things that even in the last 4 or 5 days since we've launched this that have been brought to our attention that frankly we hadn't thought of. And so we really encourage you all to go and submit feedback if you have it, ask questions, express any concerns that you have, because we certainly want to hear from everyone. And we've been sure to go ahead and get that information onto the senator as well, so that when he's talking with his colleagues and the president, that he's able to have that information there. Final thing I'll touch on would be the funding package that we passed on Tuesday of this week It looks like the House will be taking that up today. I'll turn it over to Scott to go through the details and the specific numbers, but just wanted to highlight that Senator Lee flew back to Washington, D.C. on Monday to engage with his colleagues, as well as to give a speech on the Senate floor. You can find the speech at lee.senate.gov as well. But really wanted to highlight two concerns that the senator had, one being the idea that the bill was written within congressional leadership and with the administration and not including the other members of Congress. And the reason that's a concern for Senator Lee is each state gets 2 senators, and those 2 senators are there to represent their individual state. For Senator Lee's case, he's here to represent Utah, and when the decisions are not being made by the entire body of Congress, they're being made within leadership, it doesn't give the other senators the opportunity to offer amendments and offer suggestions to how to best cater the bill to their specific needs and to make the bill work for all 50 states. And so that's been a concern for Senator Lee's in the past, and certainly is a concern for him right now. The other concern he had was that we've passed a nearly $500 billion bill with most members of Congress not being in Washington, D.C. And so he believes that in order for Congress to act, Congress needs to be in Washington, D.C. negotiating and voting. And so he's certainly calling on his members or his colleagues and the other members to return back to D.C. and make sure that we're getting to work to best support state and local economies moving forward as we recover from COVID-19. So without any further ado, I'll certainly turn over to Scott Albrecht from Senator Romney's office to give more details on the bill that we passed earlier this week.
Thanks, Justin. Appreciate it, and appreciate the opportunity to be part of this webinar and to engage with our businesses around the state of Utah. As mentioned, I'm with Senator Romney's office. I'm the Central and Southwest Utah Director. Senator Romney wanted to send his well wishes to the group. He's been a tireless advocate in trying to help or get help for small businesses, and so I know that he'll continue that effort. As Justin mentioned, the Paycheck Protection Program, there was a round 1 funding, and now they funded a round 2. The first round was $350 billion, and it helped 15 million Americans stay on payroll. So just a very successful program in regards to getting paychecks to employees. The new bill that was passed on Tuesday is a $484 billion bill. $310 billion of that goes to replenish the PPP program. And so we're really excited and grateful for that. To note, there's $60 billion of that $310 billion that are set aside for smaller banks or credit unions or other institutions. They're aimed at serving at-risk or more vulnerable businesses or minority-based businesses. And so if you fall in any of those categories, make sure that you talk to your banks about being able to get part of that set-aside funding. As Justin mentioned, the Senate passed it. Now it goes to the House. We hope the House will pass that by the end of this week, and that funding can start flow to the banks and the SBA as soon as next week. So stay in touch with your banks. If you've already submitted applications, make sure you talk to your bank about making sure that's in the queue. The other part of the bill replenished the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program with $60 billion. And Marlo will go into further detail on that, so I won't. But I will mention that part of the bill that we advocated for was to allow farmers and ranchers to apply for the Economic Injury Disaster Loan, and that was approved. So if you fall in that category, make sure that you go ahead and apply for that EIDL loan if that's something that your company needs. One other program that I'll mention is the USDA Food Assistance Program. It's a $19 billion program. $16 billion will go to farmers and ranchers for actual losses. And then $3 billion will go to purchase vegetables and dairy products and meat products to keep the food chain moving. We're still learning more about this program. What I'm being told is that it's being rolled out state by state. And so we will advocate and do everything that we can to get it to the state of Utah. And I know Randy Parker's on with USDA, so you can engage with him or with us to learn more about that program. And lastly, I'll just mention, most of you have heard about the president's immigration ban. I know that's a concern for a lot of our farmers and ranchers when it comes to the H-2A program and the farm workers. So if you fall in any of those categories, know that the H-2A program and farm workers are exempt from the president's immigration ban. And so hopefully that helps as well. As mentioned, I'll put my email in the chat box and would love to engage with anyone and hear your questions and concerns so we can help solve them. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Justin and Scott, for that. And again, a key takeaway for everybody is that you have advocates who can engage Congress on your behalf. Reach out to Justin and Scott, utilize them. And I've been on many emails with them where sometimes it's an entire industry, sometimes it's a large company, but even some of the smallest companies have reached out, and I've been impressed with the way both of them have jumped in and provide assistance. And by the way, if you hear screaming kids in the background, homeschool in the Hanson household is going about what you'd expect it to be. So we got 5 kids. The oldest is 9, the youngest is 2, and it's been a little bit wild. So anyways, apologies if there's some screaming in the background during this webinar. Anyways, now we have a chance to jump into the meat and the potatoes of our webinar, if you will. Marla and John, like I mentioned in the beginning, they've done incredible work helping tens of thousands of Utah small businesses benefit from these programs. Marla, if I remember right, on the first tranche of PPP funding, it seems like there were about 24,000 Utah small businesses that had applications approved, equaling about $3.7 billion. And so that's a tremendous success, even as we recognize that there are still many, many more businesses who are somewhere in that pipeline, and we're all working very hard to help move things along, and Congress authorizing some additional funding will make a big difference. So, Marla and John, over to you for your presentation. And again, everybody, feel free to use the chat function. As Marla and John are going through the presentation, ask questions. Hannah is keeping track of those. And at the end, once we finish, we will make sure we've got time to jump in and answer your specific questions. So Marla and John, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Miles. And it's, as Miles mentioned, I'm the director at SBA here in Utah, and John Giggy serves as our district counsel. So we really appreciate the opportunity to reach out to rural communities, and I really want to thank Miles and the World Trade Center, as well as the SBDC network for hosting us this morning. And I want to thank our great partners at USDA Rural Development, as well as GoEd, both Randy Parker and Ryan Starks, that will be on here in a bit. And I truly want to thank our congressionals for working so closely with the SBA, and we really appreciate all that you're doing to support us as well as small businesses here in Utah. So I'm going to run through some of the funding options that are being offered through SBA. As Miles mentioned, the PPP program has been very successful. We basically did 14 years of loans in less than 14 days. So it's been very, very successful. And here in Utah, as Miles mentioned, we were able to deploy $3.7 billion and over 21,000 loans. And that's just with the PPP program. We know there are a lot of small businesses still in the queue to get their applications processed. So once this funding becomes available, with it being passed by the House, they'll certainly start processing all those applications. And we encourage others to go ahead and put your application in. So I'm going to walk through the CARES Act amendment changes. Scott already mentioned this, so I won't go into a whole lot of detail here, but again, there's $310 billion being added to the PPP program. He also mentioned the $60 billion set aside, so $30 billion of that will be set aside for community financial institutions less than $10 billion in assets, and then another $30 billion will be set aside for financial institutions between 10 and 50 billion in assets. So we're hoping that funding will better assist our rural communities as well. 50 billion has been set aside for the economic injury disaster loan program, and then 10 billion more will be added for the emergency EIDL grants. And I'll get into the details on that here in a bit. As Scott mentioned, agricultural enterprises were added to be eligible for EIDL, and that includes farmers and ranchers. So that is something new. We've not had that in the past. So I really encourage our farmers and ranchers to not only consider the PPP, but also the EIDL going forward. So the funding for the PPP is being administered by our SBA lenders here in the state. We typically work with about 70 lending institutions through SBA, and we're well over 200 now in the state that are working with us to deploy this program. So very grateful for all the work that they're doing. The PPP loan is 100% guaranteed, backed by the SBA. And the proceeds for this loan is primarily to be used for payroll costs. And I'll get into the forgiveness benefits on this in just a moment. But the payroll costs can include not only salary and wages for employees, and there is a cap at $100,000 per employee, but basically if employees make more than that, you're only going to be forgiven up to $100,000 per employee. It also includes vacation, sick leave, severance, healthcare benefits, and retirement benefits. You can use this loan for mortgage interest payments as well as rent and utilities and interest on pre-existing debt. One thing to consider is if you have already applied for an economic injury disaster loan, or what we call EIDL, you can roll that over or refinance into a PPP loan for you to get the forgiveness benefits. Eligible entities for the PPP include small businesses, and this is also applicable to ranchers and farmers throughout the state, tribal businesses, nonprofits, 501c3s, and veteran organizations. Sole proprietors, independent contractors, and self-employed individuals can also apply for this loan. The size standard is typical for SBA. It's 500 employees or less, but we also take into consideration the NAICS code that you might be operating under in the industry. So in other words, there are some NAICS codes where you can have more than 500 employees, but we will look at that and analyze that for you. We've waived some of our affiliation rules, including businesses with multiple locations, as well as franchises listed in our SBA franchise directory. Ineligible entities include businesses that are engaged in lending, passive businesses owned by developers and landlords, life insurance companies, pyramid sales operations, gambling, as well as private clubs. Of course, any businesses that are engaged in illegal activity are not eligible, as well as businesses that may have 20% or more owners that are engaged in legal issues. We also won't consider businesses where they've had defaulted federal loans or they've been a prior loss to the federal government. The loan terms for the PPP go up to $10 million per business. And we look at a formula for this and not projections. So it's 2.5 times the applicant's average monthly payroll costs over a 12-month period. And businesses that have been in operation for less than a year, we're going to consider January and February of this year. The maturity for this is only 2 years, and the interest rate is 1%. The payments are deferred for the first 6 months. We are including a lot of waivers under this program, including waiving the guarantee fee and annual lender fee, as well as the credit elsewhere requirement. And we can go into that in more detail. We're waiving collateral and personal guarantee requirements and prepayment penalties. So the forgiveness portion of the PPP is probably the most important aspect of this. So we're going to look at an 8-week period from initial loan disbursement in terms of actual amounts spent on payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent, and utilities. And of course, the borrower is going to have to be required to support the request, including supplying payroll tax filings, their state filings, verification of mortgage and utility payments, along with a certification from a representative. Now, again, because these loans are being administered by our SBA lenders throughout the state, all of that documentation will have to be submitted to them directly. Again, the forgiveness portion of this must account for at least 75% of the requested amount of forgiveness for payroll. So keep that in mind when you're looking at bringing back employees. So if a business reduces the number of compensation of employees during this 8-week period, the amount of forgiveness will be reduced by that much. And we're really encouraging employees to bring back their employees by June 30th, and that way they will not experience any reduction in forgiveness. Now I'm going to jump into the economic injury disaster loans. Again, we have more funding coming for this program as well. Eligible entities include small businesses, private nonprofit organizations, and small agricultural co-ops, as well as farmers and ranchers now. That's going to be included in this amendment. And then there is a requirement for credit elsewhere, so we're gonna talk about that as needed because this is different than the PPP. They must be independently owned and operated. The loan terms for this are quite different than the PPP loans. The amount only goes up to $2 million versus the $30 million with the PPP. The interest rate is also higher. It's 3.75 for small businesses and 2.75 for nonprofits. The maturity of this is much, much longer than the PPP. It goes up to 30 years. And the payment deferment is for the first year versus the PPP that's only for the first 6 months. The proceeds for the economic injury disaster loans is a little more broad in scope. You can use this for fixed debts, payroll, accounts payable, and other bills that can't be paid. But you cannot use it to refinance long-term debt. Again, the loan requirements is they have to demonstrate that they don't have credit elsewhere, which again is different than the PPP. They must have an acceptable credit history, and they must be able to demonstrate that they can make the payments. All loans over $25,000 must be secured with available collateral. So part of the EIDL is the Emergency Grant Program, and that's intended to be an advance of funding while you wait for your EIDL loan to go through. The grant amount goes up to $10,000 per business, and they're going to look at $1,000 per employee. Again, that funding should be dispersed more quickly, certainly, than your loan amount would be. It's just meant to tide you over to be used for payroll costs and that kind of thing. The period that it covers is January 31st to December 31st. The standard is that these are typically issued within 3 days of application, the funding for it. If you get the grant funding, which most folks are going to get, that amount will be subtracted from your EIDL loan. But keep in mind that the grant funding itself, you don't have to pay that back. So it's not part of the loan, it's just subtracted from your loan. You can see on the screen here, there is the portal that was set up. This is a new portal that was established after, very end of March. And basically it's a streamlined portal, and it incorporates in the emergency grant. So when you go into this portal, which is covid19relief.sba.gov/pound, when you go in there, you want to click the button for the EIDL advance or the EIDL grant. And again, this is a streamlined application process. What we're telling small businesses is if you applied before the end of March, you want to go back in through this portal and reapply so that you can get the grant funding. You'll also get your loan funding more quickly through this new portal. Keep in mind, you will stay in the queue from the submission date of your original application. And then this last slide is just our contact information. We have a main phone number here, 801-524-3209. We have someone manning those calls coming in routinely. I want to thank Miles in particular for helping to get this rapid response team set up. We are referring general inquiries to that team of volunteers. And as Miles said, I think they've had 1,700 inquiries over that now. And that a lot of those inquiries are SBA related. So a huge thank you to the rapid response teams for stepping in and volunteering. We also have an email. It's just utahgeneral@sba.gov. Again, we're watching that email inbox routinely. And then I provided the Office of Disaster Assistance information. The EIDL loans are administered through that office. We don't do them here in the district office. So I know we get a lot of requests to check on the status of applications and that kind of thing, but it's really something that needs to be done through the Office of Disaster Assistance. And then finally, I just want to emphasize the other portal where you can go in and fill out a form for the rapid response team, and that's at coronavirus.utah.gov/business. And with that, I will pass it back to Miles.
Fantastic. Thank you, Marla, very much for that overview. And again, for everybody looking in, it looks like we have a few questions coming in, but please feel free to utilize the chat function. We will have about 20 minutes at the end to go through the questions. Okay, Randy, let's talk a little bit about the programs and resources that the USDA has to offer. Over to you.
Thank you. By way of introduction, my name is Randy Parker. I'm the State Director of USDA Rural Development. And to begin my comments, I want to just say how much I appreciate the great partnerships we have helping rural Utah. And this is a good example of that, pooling our knowledge to help our rural citizens and our rural businesses. I want to make a couple of points before I talk about our programs and what's going on there. The first I want to note is that USDA Rural Development has 8 offices around the state, and our staff is engaged and open for business. They're doing business in a different way than we have in the past. It's all being done online, but we are continuing to serve our rural customers. The second point I want to make is the most up-to-date information available for our rural development programs is at this website, rd.usda.gov/coronavirus. Now some points that that our agency is doing to help our rural communities and our rural customers. Our rural housing programs, we are continuing to help with affordable housing. In fact, we're staying busy with closing and getting people into homes in rural Utah. Those things from a housing standpoint that are coronavirus related, such as our single family housing direct and guaranteed loan programs. Right now we've implemented a 60-day moratorium on evictions and foreclosures and an additional 180 days of forbearance. In our multifamily housing, USDA financed and guaranteed housing programs, we've increased the amount of assistance through tenant vouchers. Eviction and penalty protection for non-payment is in place, And we've also added to the equation forbearance and extension to our property owners while we're getting through this difficult time. From a rural utilities program standpoint, those folks that work with RD and our lenders on guaranteed loans, as an example, our sewer and water systems that are financed, our loan guarantees, our lenders may offer as much as 180-day payment deferrals. We've also extended our application deadlines on a number of our other programs to help through this coronavirus crisis. Our rural business cooperative service programs, our business and industry and rural energy for America loan guarantees, we right now have offered 180-day loan deferrals. We've extended our loan application deadlines for our rural business development grants as well. Now, when we're talking about what USDA Rural Development has made available through the CARES Act, there are a number of things. I'll go through them briefly. Our business and industry guaranteed loan program received an additional $1 billion in lending authority. We've increased our repayment terms of up to 10 years, and our repayment loan payments could be deferred up to 12 months. And even beyond that, terms may be extended an additional 3 years. Eligible expenses for our business and industry program would be payroll, healthcare benefits, rent, lease, utilities, and so forth. From Connecting Rural Utah, our Reconnect program that is helping expand broadband and particularly last mile for farmers and ranchers received an additional $100 billion for grants to help connect our rural communities. Priority for that will be those that were unfunded in the first round when we ran short of money at the 300 million level. Our distance learning and telemedicine grant program, both of which we've learned is very important and valuable while we've been in this coronavirus crisis. We received an additional 25 million for our DLT grants, and that's in addition to 70 million we had currently available. And the application window is now open April 14th through July 13th if there are communities or providers that are interested in that. And again, our website is updated daily. It's almost live available information. So again, that website is rd.usda.gov/coronavirus. Thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this, and we'll make it through it, and all of us working together. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Randy, very much for that overview. And now finally, last but not least, we got Ryan Starks with the Governor's Office of Economic Development. Ryan, over to you for a quick update on the Bridge Loan Program and also a couple of the initiatives that you and your team are working with the legislature on.
Great. Well, thank you, Miles, and thank you for your leadership throughout this. It's great to see. Thanks to Marla and to Scott and Justin and Randy and everybody else participating. This is our third round, our third time going through this webinar, and each time I'm blown away by the good information. So as Miles indicated, I'm Ryan Starks. I'm the Managing Director of Business Services at the Utah Governor's Office of Economic Development. And we really commend our federal partners for the good work that they're doing. The SBA and our congressional partners, we as the Economic Development Office lean on them heavily for assistance and for cooperation and support. And thus far, it's been really awesome, this partnership. We're also looking into other ways to help serve our business community, especially in rural Utah. And we're working closely with the Utah legislature. As you know, they went into special session last week. They're wrapping up their session today. One of the things that they're working on is a commercial rental assistance program to help small businesses that are having a hard time paying their rent or paying their lease payment. And so businesses that are registered, that may be a tribal business, a sole proprietor, an independent contractor, or a self-employed business may qualify. The business must have fewer than 100 employees and have its principal place of business in Utah. And if this business has received a PPP loan, then they may receive up to a $5,000 loan to help offset the cost of rent. If they have not received the PPP loan, they may receive up to a $10,000 loan to help offset the cost of rent. So we expect that this is going to pass later today and be signed quickly. If anybody's curious to follow, if you go to the Utah Legislative website, it's SB 3006. And as we learn more about this program, we're happy to share that with everybody on this call. We tend to send emails and do webinars and things like that. So GoEd will be the administrator of this program. We are hiring a part-time administrator to help facilitate it so that we can get going immediately. A couple of other things, we're working closely with our Utah Association of Counties to launch a statewide revolving loan fund program. This would be funded through the EIDL, a grant that Utah would receive, and we expect and hope to receive that funding sooner than later. It'd have a low interest, and all businesses in Utah would be eligible to apply for this revolving loan fund money. We also have put in a request with the Utah legislature to help support a new campaign that GoEd would like to really champion, and that's to promote business to business and consumer to business awareness. We need to remind everybody that as we recover from this economic downturn, that we need to support our local businesses and help them because they're the ones that do so much for us. We're also working closely with our SBDCs, our small business development centers, and our business resource centers, looking for some additional funding and opportunities to help provide training opportunities for our business community. We anticipate that many of our businesses will lean on the SBDCs and the BRCs for help with guidance and technical assistance as they recover from this difficult time. And then finally, the last thing I just wanted to share is that GoEd launched a small business loan program a few weeks ago, something that we felt that we could administer quickly and rapidly, something that could help bridge the gap for many of these businesses until the SBA loans kicked in. So we had 2 rounds, $12 million total, 11 million came from the state, and then we also had the Workers' Compensation Fund contribute an additional $1 million. And so in round 1, we were able to fund just over 500 businesses. And then just this week, we concluded round 2, where we funded 648 businesses. And in round 2, actually with both rounds, we had a goal of funding at least 25% of our businesses that are rural. And between the 2 rounds, that number actually turned out to be over 30% of our rural businesses received some type of funding. These are 0% loans of up to 5 years. They're non-recourse loans. And after the first year is when we expect the business to start paying back. So 5.2% of the funding went to nonprofits. We're sending letters out today, and we'll have checks in the mail tomorrow and Saturday. So this is a really quick turnaround from application to actually receiving the funding. It's about a 10-day process. We hope that either through some of this federal stimulus or through some additional state funding, we can continue this program and have additional rounds of funding. But that's where we are with that, and that's my report, Miles. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, very much for that overview. Okay, Hannah, over to you to moderate our Q&A session.
Perfect. The first question we have, someone submitted a question about what is the funding source and the process to get loan forgiveness?
Leanne?
Yeah. Were they asking what is the funding source for the amounts paid in forgiveness?
Yes.
Well, those are appropriations that have been allocated by Congress. So the money's been given to SBA. SBA will provide reimbursements to the lenders who pay the forgiveness amounts. So the lender will pay a bunch of loan forgivenesses, and then they can apply to SBA for reimbursement of those advances.
And then, John, could you describe the process? So for the businesses that they've received their PPP loans or they're in process or they anticipate receiving them, what would you recommend they do over the next 2 months to make it as easy as possible on the back end to apply for and receive forgiveness for the loan?
Yeah, that's a good thing to address. So you've got this 8-week period. Once you receive a first disbursement on your loan, you have 8 weeks to accrue those costs that will be forgiven. So yes, get your payroll records together, keep them accurate throughout that 8-week period. I know they're going to want to see some of the payroll processing records. I know like 941 quarterlies, those kind of things that show what kind of payroll costs you paid out, any rent, utilities that you paid out. After you go through your 8-week period, then you can apply to your lender for forgiveness of those actual amounts. The lender will assess that request. They have a little time to act on that request. And once they do that, then they apply to SBA for whatever amounts they advance.
And Miles, I know I mentioned this during the presentation, but they're also going to want their payroll tax filings or state filings, as well as verification of their mortgage and utility payments.
Yep, that's great. And John, you touched on something that I think is worth amplifying a little bit. Once a business's loan is approved, John, I believe you mentioned yesterday that they have a 10-day window to receive the funding. For the business, their 8 weeks starts the day that they receive the funding. And so as a business, you can take a look at your pay cycle, when you anticipate paying people, and you just want to think through a little bit within that 10-day window, what is going to maximize the benefit to your business on taking payment. So maybe it's waiting, and if you can, wait until, a day before you're going to make payroll. Maybe it's you're looking at your rent payments, timing, and whatnot. But I would encourage businesses to take a few minutes to think through within that 10-day window, what would be the right day to begin that 8-week window, because it is a firm 8 weeks from the day you accept the loan. The period where you can make where you can make payments and receive forgiveness is exactly 8 weeks later.
Yeah, and I would say that's accurate. And I think this is a good place to recommend that many of you who have questions about how to figure out your payroll costs up front to get the loan, or how to track those during the 8-week period, we have our small business development centers throughout the state, many of them in these rural areas. So we always recommend go by, see them, and get their advice and help. I know they've got a few CPAs in the system. So if you have any questions about that, please reach out to them.
Great. And while we're talking about forgiveness, we did have another question about that. So if they get the PPP loan and don't use 75% actually for payroll costs, i.e. to apply for forgiveness, can or will they carry the difference on the loan term to repay on installments?
Yes, any amounts that don't qualify for the forgiveness will remain as a loan amount that will be amortized over the period of the loan to be repaid.
Great. A lot of people are asking if they need to reapply. So if they applied in the first round before March 31st, do they need to reapply?
So I just want to jump in here because I've been asked this question quite a bit. And, these are two different loans that we're talking about, right? The PPP and the EIDL. The PPP is administered by the SBA lenders. So they really should check with their lenders to make sure they're going to stay in the queue. In other words, the lender intends to process those applications that weren't processed prior to us running out of funds, that those guys are still going to be in the queue for this next round of funding. Again, they need to check with the lenders on this. The EIDL is the one that I mentioned earlier, where we established a new portal through the Office of Disaster Assistance. And that's the one where we really want small businesses to go back in and reapply so that they can click the button for the emergency grant. And through that streamlined portal, they will still stay in the queue from their original submission date of their application.
I think the confusion is this. Marla did mention the March 29th date. So during the first round of funding, which went up to last week, there were 2 different portals available during that first round. So if you applied when the first portal was up before March 29th, go back in and reapply. If you applied after the March 29th portal was updated, you do not need to go back in and reapply now that the second round is coming out.
Perfect, thanks. Can you apply for both PPP and EIDL? And how can you refinance EIDL into PPP?
You can apply for both, but they can't be used for the same purpose. So in other words, if you received an EIDL and it covers payroll costs, and then you want to go and apply for a PPP that also covers payroll costs, you can't do both. But you can refinance your EIDL, that portion, into the PPP to get the forgiveness. And you would just simply do that with the lender. Johnny, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think that's good.
Perfect. When will farmers be able to apply for EIDL?
As soon as the funding's available. And keep in mind, I know, I believe it was Scott mentioned the funding might come available next week. If it passes the House, the funding could come available right away. And so I know that, a lot of small businesses submit their applications over the weekend, whatever else. So just keep that in mind.
Yeah, the portal is not open right now to accept applications, but and I'm going to type the web address in the chat section again, but be checking it in the next couple of days and be ready to get your application in as soon as it's back online.
And Marlon, John, on that point, my guess is that that once the portal is online, the application itself is not going to be very different than the application what it was for the first round of funding. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, that's correct.
And so that means if I'm a small business and I'm interested in applying for EIDL and I know how much demand there's going to be, right now, today, if I haven't yet, I would go back, I'd get that application, I would make sure I have all the information ready to go, I'd fill it out, I'd have the documents. I know that you'll have to take that and put that into the portal, but I'd have everything ready to go. And so then as soon as that portal goes live, I could get in there, I could get my information and submit it. It reminds me of back during the Olympics, they did all these concerts and you had to get online and they opened the concerts at like 9 a.m. and by 9:02 a.m., every concert was sold out. And so a lot of people were right there refreshing every 15 seconds, waiting for the portal to open up so you could request your free tickets. And my guess is it's not going to be that bad, but I would be ready to go. So as soon as it's live, I could get my information in there as quickly as possible.
Right, and keep in mind too that the Office of Disaster Assistance is still processing those applications that were already in the queue. In other words, they have anticipated that the funding is going to run dry, right? And so they're still processing those loans. So I just wanted to clarify that. I did check with the Office of Disaster Assistance on Friday, and they did clarify that for us.
And I've seen a lot of comments in the chat that, I applied 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Right.
I haven't heard anything. Please be patient.
Yeah.
They are onboarding more employees. They were inundated with hundreds of thousands of applications, and they are getting to them. I know they're getting to a lot of the advances, and then the application process could take 2 to 3 weeks after that.
And how will they be notified once they kind of get to their application?
Well, once they submit the application, they will get a response back with a number that starts with a 3. And I've seen a couple people type in their loan numbers. And if it starts with a 3, then you have your number. Then the process is they'll go through the advance request, get the advance out. Then they really don't contact you until they're almost to the end of the process. of your application. Then a loan servicer will reach back out to you and let you know what kind of further information they need.
Perfect. And kind of following up to the last question about how to refinance, what if PPP comes first and then the EIDL comes? Is the process to refinancing still just working with your bank, or do you need to reject the EIDL loan?
Well, if you receive a PPP loan up front, you can't go back and refinance the EIDL into it if you get the EIDL after. But you can still get the EIDL as a separate loan as long as you don't do it for the same purpose, specifically the payroll part of it.
Perfect.
And you can always reject an EIDL. If you get approved, you don't have to accept the loan.
Great. Someone asked, they said they had a higher overtime in 2019, but now under the PPP program, they're giving everyone 40 hours with make work. Will they be penalized by not having the employees work the same hours they did in 2019?
There is a reduction for, if you reduce the number of employees, so they develop a quotient comparing what you have this year to last year. They also do it for a reduction in the compensation levels. So I don't know, that's a pretty good question. Again, maybe reach out to our SBDCs as you're trying to go forward and plan how you're going to accrue these costs and incur them. We're not really up to speed on the exact calculations and how that will work.
Great. And where can applicants find what is required for them for the loans?
Well, for example, the EIDL loan, it's a fairly simple application process. It's 5 screens. You are not going to have to upload any documentation at first. When they get back out to you, they will maybe require some documentation, and it's only a 20 to 30-minute process. With the PPP, again, you're going through your lenders, so depending on the particular lender, there will be a basic specific set of documents you'll need. For example, the borrower application, which is a standard form, but then check with your lender to see if they're going to require any. And of course, you're going to have your payroll documentation. Again, be going back over the last 12 months, get all that payroll documentation in order. You are going to have to establish what your payroll cost levels are.
Great. Is there a calculation for the reduction in forgiveness for reducing headcount on the PPP loan? They understand a reduction in overall payroll will reduce the forgiveness dollar, but they want to know if there's a calculation on headcount.
Yeah, and again, it's a quotient you get from whatever your FTE level is right now, divided by whatever it was during the same period of time last year, so something to that effect, fairly close to that.
Great. This question comes from a CPA. They have some clients who haven't yet felt the pinch from the virus, and they're unsure if they will. Do you recommend that they apply? They don't want to miss the funding, but they're also not sure that they're going to need it.
Well, I think we always recommend go in and apply, and just in case. And again, you don't have to accept it if you don't want to. If circumstances change while your application's in process, where you don't think you need it, then you just don't accept the loan.
Great. And what are the best options for those who have been shut down for weeks but don't have any employees?
Well, if you had employees before, again, this is a payroll program to try to get people back on board. So we recommend bring those people back on board. Even if you're the type of business that's shut down, if you're a movie theater or a restaurant or whatever, and your local government isn't allowing you to operate, still you can put them on the payroll and pay them. You are going to be reimbursed for those outlays. But the purpose is to keep these employees paid for the next 2 or 3 months while we get through this. And
Got you. Assuming that the funding gets passed tomorrow and signed by the president, will the portal go online over the weekend?
It's possible that might happen, and so I really encourage businesses to continue to check that portal website that we provided throughout the weekend, because they may open it up.
Great. So if your company has the number 3 number, can they still go in and apply for the grant?
Well, if they got a 3 number, that would have been after they implemented the new portal and an application process, and that would have included the screen where you elect the grant. So they should have already done that. So there's maybe 5 screens on the application process. About the 4th screen, there's a checkbox where you check if you want the 10K advance. And if you have a 3 number, that should have been the process you'd gone through.
Great. And the last question so far is, what if your staff has already applied for unemployment? What should you do then?
I mean, we've heard from a lot of people that said our employees don't want to get paid because we can get more through the new elevated levels of unemployment insurance they're providing, and that's a difficult problem. I don't know if we can really give too much business advice. That's something the business has to work out with their employees. But
I mean, employers can request that their employees come back to work, and then that's a decision that I think the employees need to make. But like John said, you know, those types of business questions should really be referred to the Small Business Development Center network that we have throughout the state.
Great. And we just got another question. Is there a place to find what is required for the EIDL loans?
yeah, I know we talked about this a little bit in yesterday's webinar, and there's a series of 3 or 4 documents. Again, when you go through the application process up front, you will not be required to upload anything. You'll just answer a bunch of questions and fill out some information. We do have copies of like 3 or 4 documents where you list your liabilities, you list your income, and we can make those available if you email our Utah General line.
Great, thanks. Miles?
Great. Thank you, everybody, for participating, for all the questions, and a big thanks to all of our panelists, and particularly Marla and John, for fielding all of those questions. In conclusion, I know we didn't have time to get to every question. You have many resources to help you get answers to your questions and to help you along the process. Again, all the information that we've discussed today is on coronavirus.utah.gov/business. You can also there get help from the rapid response team. They'll work with you one-on-one to answer many of these types of questions that we've had today. And then also, the last thing that we didn't talk about that I want to flag very quickly is some of the tax benefits that were part of the CARES Act. And these won't apply for everybody, but for those that they do apply for, there's a way to get some additional cash back. I will touch on them very, very briefly right now, but I encourage you to reach out to whoever works with you on your taxes, ask them to take a look into whether or not you would benefit. In the CARES Act, there were a couple significant changes made to how companies can carry forward losses from previous years. These changes were retroactive back to January 1st, 2018, which means for these changes, you could go back, and if they would have benefited you when you applied for 2018 or filed your 2018 taxes or your 2019 taxes, you can file an amended return, get this benefit, and get an additional refund back into your business as soon as the IRS can process the refunds. There were also some changes made to qualified improvements, so improvements to the interior of any buildings or facilities that you have in your business. Again, going back to January 1st, 2018, you could write off the entire cost as depreciation of those improvements. Do the amendment, you can get some cash back. And there are also opportunities to defer paying your payroll taxes. That 6.2% on top of payroll that would go to Social Security. You can defer those payments to 2021 and 2022. And there are a few other changes as well. So as you're looking at options, you have PPP, you have EIDL, the USDA programs, the GoEd programs, and also these tax benefits can help bring cash back to your business now and also save you having to make some tax payments here over the next quarter. But again, thank you for being with us. Reach out to us through the Rapid Response Team. We'll plug in support and do everything we can to help you as we all continue to fight the good fight against COVID-19. Thank you again and have a great day.